25 centuries ago, a man named Cyrus rode out from the highlands of Anshan and within 11 years conquered every major civilization from the Indus River to the shores of the Aegean Sea. He then did something no conqueror before him had ever done. He let the defeated keep their gods, their customs, their dignity. That single act defined an empire, and the civilization it birthed never died. Not when Alexander burned Persepolis, not when Arab armies toppled the last Sasanian king, not when Mongol horsemen erased entire cities from the earth. Persia endured, transformed, and rose again every single time. This is the complete story. From the undeciphered clay tablets of Proto-Elamite scribes 4,000 years before Christ, through the Median tribes who first united Iranian peoples into a kingdom, to the Achaemenid glory of Persepolis and its 23 tribute nations. From the Parthian archers who humiliated Rome at Carrhae, to the Sasanian emperors who captured a Roman Caesar alive. From the shattering Arab conquest and the slow, magnificent reassertion of Persian identity through poetry, science, and administrative genius, to the Safavid revolution that made Shurism the soul of a nation. From the splendor of Isfahan to the humiliations of the Qajar era, the forced modernization of the Pahlavis, and the Islamic revolution that stunned the world in 1979. Iran today, 88 million people strong, remains the only civilization state in the Middle East whose cultural thread has never been severed. Its borders echo ancient satrapies. Its poetry still shapes daily speech. Its struggles between tradition and transformation define not only a nation, but a question the entire world faces. If you value complete journeys through the rise and transformation of civilizations, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Each week, we bring you the full story of a world that shaped history. Let us begin where all Persian stories begin, with the land itself, the plateau between the mountains and the desert. The Iranian plateau rises from the earth like a vast tilted table, rimmed on its western edge by the Zagros Range and on its north by the Alborz, its interior given over to salt deserts where summer temperatures crack stone. Yet along the rivers that drain from these mountains, the Karun, the Dez, the Karkeh, alluvial plains collect the silt of millennia. And it is here, in the lowland province of Khuzestan, that one of humanity's earliest experiments in urban civilization took root. By the 4th millennium before the Common Era, settlements along the Susiana Plain had grown dense enough to require administration. Clay tokens gave way to clay tablets, and on these tablets appeared a script that remains undeciphered to this day. Proto-Elamite writing, pressed into wet clay with reed styluses around 3300 before the Common Era. The city of Susa, already ancient by this period, served as the administrative center of a network that stretched eastward to Anshan in the highlands of modern Fars province. These were not villages. They were cities with granaries, workshops, and bureaucratic hierarchies capable of organizing labor across hundreds of kilometers. The Elamite kingdom that crystallized from these early urban centers endured for more than 2,000 years, from roughly 2700 before the Common Era until the Achaemenid conquest. Its greatest surviving monument rises from the Khuzestan plain at a site called Choga Zanbil, a ziggurat of fired brick constructed around 1250 before the Common Era by the Elamite king Untash-Napirisha. 5 concentric walls once enclosed temples dedicated to the Elamite pantheon, and the central tower climbed in stepped terraces toward the sky. Even in ruin, its mass dominates the flat landscape, a testament to the organizational power of a civilization that thrived centuries before any Iranian-speaking people set foot on this plateau. Those peoples came from the northeast. Between 1500 and 1000 years before the Common Era, waves of Indo-Iranian pastoralists migrated southward from the Central Asian steppes, driving herds of cattle and horses through mountain passes into the plateau's interior. They spoke languages ancestral to both Persian and Sanskrit. They brought with them iron-working technology, horse-drawn chariots, and a cosmology centered on fire, truth, and cosmic order. Gradually, over generations, they settled among the indigenous populations of the plateau, intermarrying, adopting local agricultural techniques, and forming tribal confederations adapted to the highland terrain. By the 9th century before the Common Era, Assyrian military scribes recording campaigns into the Zagros began noting two distinct groups among the mountain peoples they encountered. In 844 before the Common Era, the annals of Shalmaneser III mention tribute received from the lands of Paswa and Madai, the earliest known references to the peoples who would become the Persians and the Medes. These were not yet kingdoms. They were loose confederations of clans occupying valleys and upland pastures, paying tribute when Assyrian armies appeared, and resuming independence when those armies withdrew. The plateau itself shaped them. Its distances demanded mobility. Its aridity rewarded those who could engineer water. Already the earliest qanats, underground channels carrying snowmelt from mountain aquifers to lowland fields, were being dug through the dry earth. Its mountain walls provided refuge from imperial armies, while its position between Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and the Indus Valley made it a corridor of exchange. Bronze vessels, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, tin from the east, all passed through these highlands. The peoples who controlled the passes grew wealthy and connected, even as they remained politically fragmented. The plateau was waiting. Not for a conqueror, but for the idea that these scattered tribes shared something deeper than geography, a common identity that would, within 2 centuries, reshape the ancient world. The idea arrives not as a single revelation, but as a slow crystallization across generations. Sometime in the early 7th century before the Common Era, the scattered Iranian-speaking tribes of the northwestern plateau begin to coalesce around a center of gravity. The Greeks would later call this people the Medes, and their heartland stretches across the fertile valleys south of the Alborz range, where the modern city of Hamadan now stands beneath the shadow of Mount Alvand. Here, at an elevation where mountain streams converge and caravan routes cross, a settlement grows into something unprecedented on the Iranian plateau, a true capital city. Herodotus attributes the founding of Ecbatana to a figure named Deokis, a judge whose reputation for fairness drew ever larger circles of allegiance from quarreling tribal chiefs. Whether Deioces represents a single historical ruler or a compressed memory of the unification process itself, the outcome is clear. By the mid-7th century before the Common Era, the Medes possess what no Iranian people had achieved before, a centralized monarchy with a fortified royal seat. Ecbatana rises in concentric rings of walls, each painted a different color according to later accounts, the innermost circuits plated in silver and gold. The archaeological reality beneath modern Hamadan remains largely unexcavated, buried under centuries of continuous habitation. But the city's strategic position confirms its logic as a capital tie, commanding the great east-west route that would later become the Royal Road. The first Median kings consolidate power against constant Assyrian pressure. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, ruling from Nineveh, had long treated the Iranian highlands as a raiding ground and buffer zone. Assyrian inscriptions record campaigns against Median chieftains throughout the 8th and 7th centuries. But under Cyaxares, who takes the Median throne around 625 before the Common Era, the relationship inverts. Cyaxares reorganizes the Median army, separating troops by weapon type, spearmen, archers, cavalry, rather than by tribal affiliation. This structural reform transforms a confederation of warrior bands into a disciplined military force. The opportunity comes when Assyria weakens under civil wars and Babylonian revolt. Cyaxares forges an alliance with Nabopolassar of Babylon, sealed by a dynastic marriage. In 614 before the Common Era, the combined Median and Babylonian armies march on the Assyrian heartland. Nineveh, the greatest city in the world, falls in 612 after a 3-month siege. The destruction is total. The empire that had terrorized the ancient Near East for 3 centuries collapses within a single decade, its territories divided between the victors. Media takes the northern and eastern portions, the Armenian highlands, parts of Anatolia, and the entire Iranian plateau. Under Cyaxares and his son Astyages, the Median Empire becomes the dominant power of Western Asia. Its territory stretches from central Anatolia, where a famous battle against Lydia in 585 before the Common Era ends in a solar eclipse, and a negotiated peace, to the borders of Central Asia. The Medes rule not through tight administrative control, but through a system of vassal kingdoms, and among their most important vassals are the Persians, a closely related Iranian people settled in the southwestern region of Anshan, in what is now Fars province. The Persian tribal confederation, led by the Achaemenid clan, serves the Median throne loyally for generations. They pay tribute, provide soldiers, and accept their subordinate position within the Median imperial order. The arrangement holds through decades of stability. Ecbatana grows wealthy on trade and tribute. Median nobles adopt elements of Mesopotamian court culture while maintaining their Iranian traditions, the worship of Ahura Mazda, the reverence for fire, the distinctive dress of trousers and riding coats that distinguished Iranian peoples from their robed Mesopotamian neighbors. The kingdom that had broken Assyria appears unassailable, its dynasty secure, its vassals obedient. Yet within the Persian vassal house, a prince is growing, whose ambition will shatter this entire order and replace it with something the world has never seen. His name is Cyrus, son of Cambyses, of the Achaemenid line, and in 553 before the Common Era, he raises the standard of revolt against his grandfather Astyages, the king of Media. The rebellion does not emerge from nowhere. Years of discontent among Median nobles, resentment at Astyages' increasingly erratic rule, and the quiet diplomacy of a Persian vassal prince who has been building alliances across the plateau, all converge in a single decisive moment. When the armies meet near Pasargadae, a portion of the Median force defects. Astyages falls into Persian hands. Ecbatana opens its gates without a siege. The Median Empire, which had seemed eternal just months before, passes into Achaemenid possession in a transfer so swift that the ancient world barely comprehends what has happened. Yet Cyrus does something unprecedented. He does not raze Ecbatana. He does not massacre the Median aristocracy. He absorbs them, their administrators, their military commanders, their court protocols, into a new imperial structure where Medes serve alongside Persians as partners rather than subjects. This principle of incorporation rather than annihilation becomes the defining characteristic of everything that follows. In 546 before the Common Era, Cyrus turns westward. Croesus of Lydia, fabulously wealthy from the gold of the Pactolus River, has crossed the Halys boundary expecting easy conquest. Instead, Cyrus pursues him back to Sardis and takes the Lydian capital after a brief siege. The Greek cities of Ionia, formerly Lydian vassals, pass under Persian authority. Again, local institutions remain largely intact. Temples continue to function. Commerce flows uninterrupted. The conquest of Babylon in 539 before the Common Era represents the culmination of this philosophy. The Babylonian king Nabonidus has alienated his own priesthood through religious reforms that displaced the cult of Marduk. When Cyrus's forces divert the Euphrates and enter the city through the riverbed, resistance is minimal. The population receives the Persian king not as a conqueror, but as a liberator restoring proper worship. The cylinder inscription that Cyrus commissions, pressed into wet clay in Akkadian cuneiform, declares that he has returned displaced peoples to their homelands and restored their gods to their temples. The Jewish captives held in Babylon since Nebuchadnezzar's deportations receive permission to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. From the Indus River to the shores of the Aegean, from the deserts of Central Asia to the cataracts of Egypt's border, an empire now stretches that dwarfs anything previously constructed. Cyrus governs it from multiple capitals, Pasargadae in the Persian heartland, Ecbatana for summer administration, Babylon for the western provinces, Susa for its ancient prestige. The system relies on existing local elites who now answer to Persian-appointed governors while retaining their customs, languages, and religious practices. At Pasargadae, the first Achaemenid capital, Cyrus builds on a scale that reflects this new universalism. Gardens watered by stone channels, the earliest known formal Persian gardens, surround audience halls whose columns blend Lydian, Babylonian, and Iranian architectural traditions. An inscription on a column base reads simply, "I am Cyrus, the king, the Achaemenid." The modesty of the statement belies the enormity of the achievement. In 530 before the Common Era, campaigning against the Massagetæ on the northeastern frontier, Cyrus falls in battle. His body returns to Pasargadae, where it rests in a modest gabled tomb of white limestone, raised on a stepped platform, deliberately simple, deliberately enduring. The empire he leaves behind stretches across 3 continents and encompasses dozens of peoples who have never before been united under a single authority. His son Cambyses inherits not merely territory but a revolutionary idea, that empire can be built on accommodation rather than terror, that diversity strengthens rather than weakens, that a king's greatness is measured not by what he destroys, but by what he preserves. Cambyses marches south. In 525 before the Common Era, the son of Cyrus crosses the Sinai and defeats Pharaoh Psamtik III at Pelusium, adding Egypt, the oldest civilization on earth, to the Achaemenid domain. The empire now spans from the Nile cataracts to the Indus tributaries, from the Aral Sea to the Persian Gulf. But Cambyses dies on the return journey in 522, and the empire shudders. What follows is a succession crisis of extraordinary violence. A pretender claiming to be Cambyses' brother Bardia seizes the throne. Within months, a conspiracy of 7 Persian nobles acts. Darius, son of Hystaspes, of a junior Achaemenid line, kills the pretender and claims kingship. Revolts erupt simultaneously across 19 provinces: Babylon twice, Elam, Media, Parthia, Margiana, Satagidia. In a single year, Darius fights 19 battles against 9 rebel kings. He wins everyone. High on the cliff face at Behistun, along the road connecting Babylon to Ecbatana, Darius commissions his testament. Carved 70 meters above the ground in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, the inscription declares his victories, names his defeated enemies, and invokes Ahura Mazda as the source of his authority. The relief shows Darius with his foot upon the prostrate pretender, 9 captive kings roped together before him. It is propaganda on a geological scale, meant to be seen by every traveler on the road below, meant to endure beyond the memory of living men. But Darius is far more than a warrior. He is an administrator of genius, and the empire he inherits through blood, he transforms through bureaucracy. He divides the realm into 23 satrapies, each governed by a satrap drawn from the Persian or Median nobility, each assessed a fixed annual tribute in silver, gold, horses, or grain. Alongside each satrap stands a military commander answering directly to the king, and alongside both operates a network of royal inspectors, the eyes and ears of the king, who travel unannounced, reporting on loyalty and efficiency. The royal road stretches 2,700 kilometers from Susa to Sardis in western Anatolia. 111 posting stations punctuate its length, each equipped with fresh horses and riders. A message can traverse the entire distance in 7 days, a speed that will not be matched in this region for 2,000 years. Herodotus marvels that neither snow nor rain, nor heat nor darkness stays these couriers from their appointed rounds. At Persepolis, construction begins around 518 before the Common Era. The site rises on a massive stone terrace, partly carved from the living rock of the mountain, partly built up with enormous limestone blocks fitted without mortar. The Apadana, the great audience hall, stands on 72 columns, each nearly 20 meters tall, crowned with double-headed bull capitals. Its eastern staircase bears relief carvings of extraordinary precision, delegations from 23 subject nations ascending in procession, each identifiable by costume, hairstyle, and tribute offerings. Medians bring horses and short swords, Babylonians carry bolts of cloth, Indians offer gold dust and a donkey, Ethiopians bring an okapi and elephant tusks. This is not merely decoration, it is a political theology rendered in stone, the vision of an ordered cosmos in which diverse peoples participate willingly in a universal harmony under the king's justice. The concept is arta, cosmic truth, the Zoroastrian principle that the righteous king maintains order against the forces of chaos and falsehood. Darius introduces the gold derrick coin, standardizing commerce across the empire. He completes a canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea, anticipating the Suez Canal by 24 centuries. He commissions a legal codification drawing on Babylonian, Elamite, and Egyptian traditions. He sponsors expeditions. Silax of Carianda sails from the Indus to the Red Sea, mapping the maritime route. Yet the western frontier troubles him. The Ionian Greek cities of Anatolia revolt in 499, burning the satrapal capital of Sardis. Darius suppresses the rebellion by 494, then sends an expeditionary force across the Aegean. At Marathon, in 490 before the Common Era, Athenian hoplites rout the Persian landing force. It is a peripheral setback in an empire of 50 million souls, but it plants a seed of confidence in Greek hearts that will bear bitter fruit. Darius dies in 486, planning a larger invasion. His son Xerxes inherits both the throne and the unfinished business with Greece. Xerxes inherits an empire that still dwarfs anything the Greek world can imagine. In 480 before the Common Era, he assembles what ancient sources describe as the largest military force ever gathered, perhaps 200,000 soldiers, though later Greek accounts inflate the number beyond reason. Engineers bridge the Hellespont with linked boats, and for 7 days the army crosses from Asia into Europe, a river of humanity flowing westward. The advance is methodical. Thessaly submits. Northern Greek states offer earth and water in token of surrender. At the narrow coastal pass of Thermopylae, a small Greek force under the Spartan king Leonidas delays the Persian advance for 3 days before a mountain path reveals their flank. The defenders are annihilated, but the delay has purchased time. The Persian army enters Attica and burns the evacuated city of Athens, setting fire to the temples on the Acropolis, a retribution, perhaps, for the burning of Sardis 2 decades earlier. Yet the war turns at sea. In the Strait of Salamis, the Greek fleet, largely Athenian triremes, lures the larger Persian navy into confined waters where numbers become a liability. Xerxes watches from a golden throne on the shore as his ships tangle and founder. The defeat does not destroy the expedition, but it severs the fleet's ability to supply the army through the winter. Xerxes withdraws to Asia, leaving his general Mardonius with a substantial land force. The following summer, at Plataea in 479, the combined Greek army crushes Mardonius. On the same day, tradition holds, the Greek fleet burns the Persian ships beached at Mycale on the Anatolian coast. The Aegean is lost. The Ionian cities slip from imperial control. What follows is not collapse, but recalibration. The empire remains vast, from Egypt to Central Asia, from the Caucasus to the Arabian Sea. The loss of a few Aegean islands and coastal cities represents a fraction of imperial territory. Xerxes returns to Persepolis and continues building programs, adding the Hall of 100 Columns. He is assassinated in 465 by a court conspiracy. But the succession continues. Under Artaxerxes I, the empire stabilizes. The Peace of Callias, reached around 449, establishes a working boundary. Persian ships stay east of certain Aegean limits. Greek forces remain west of Anatolia's interior. It is a pragmatic arrangement that acknowledges reality on both sides. The later Achaemenid century reveals an empire governing through gold as much as iron. During the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, Persian satraps fund first one side, then the other, weakening both. The King's Peace of 387, dictated by Artaxerxes II, reasserts Persian authority over the Anatolian Greek cities, a diplomatic triumph that reverses the military losses of a century earlier without a single major battle. Yet internal fractures deepen. Satrapal revolts flare in the 360s. Egypt breaks free for 6 decades before Reconquest. The court becomes a theater of conspiracy and fratricide. Artaxerxes III secures his throne by eliminating dozens of relatives. When Darius III takes power in 336, the administrative machinery still functions, tribute still flows, but the center has grown brittle. Alexander of Macedon crosses into Asia in 334. At the Granicus River, he defeats the local satrapal forces. At Issus in 333, Darius himself flees the field. At Gaugamela in 331, the decisive engagement unfolds on a flat plain chosen by the Persians. Yet Alexander's cavalry breaks through. Darius retreats eastward and is murdered by his own satrap Bessus in 330. Alexander enters Persepolis in 330 and burns it. Whether in drunken revelry or calculated vengeance remains debated. The ceremonial heart of the empire becomes ash and blackened stone. But the empire's administrative skeleton survives. Alexander adopts Persian court dress, retains satraps, marries Roxana of Bactria. He dies in Babylon in 323, and his generals carve the conquered lands among themselves. The Iranian plateau passes to Seleucus, founder of the Seleucid dynasty, who rules from Antioch and Seleucia on the Tigris. Greek becomes the language of administration, but beneath it, in villages and temples and the memory of fire altars, Iranian identity waits. It waits for nearly a century. Through the reigns of Seleucus and his successors, through the founding of Greek cities across the plateau, Alexandria in Aria, Alexandria in Arachosia, Seleucia on the Tigris with its agora and gymnasium, Iranian identity persists in the countryside, in the fire temples that still burn on hilltops, in the oral traditions of priests who remember the old hymns. The Seleucid kings rule from Antioch, their attention divided between Ptolemaic Egypt and the restless Greek world to the west. The eastern satrapies grow distant, ungovernable, ripe. Around 247 before the Common Era, in the northeastern province of Parthia, a wind-swept land of horse-breeding step between the Kopet Dag Mountains and the Karakum Desert, a tribal chieftain named Arsaces leads his semi-nomadic Parni people in revolt against the Seleucid governor. The details are obscure, filtered through hostile Greek sources, but the result is unmistakable. Arsaces establishes an independent kingdom, and his dynasty, the Arsacids, will endure for nearly 5 centuries. The early Arsacid kings consolidate slowly, absorbing Hyrcania to the south of the Caspian, fortifying their capital at Nisa, where circular temples and treasury buildings rise from the dry earth. Ivory rhytons carved with Greek mythological scenes sit alongside Iranian ceremonial vessels, the visual vocabulary of a dynasty comfortable with cultural synthesis. But the decisive transformation comes under Mithridates I, who reigns from approximately 171 to 138 before the Common Era. He sweeps westward, capturing Media, then Seleucia on the Tigris itself in 141. The Seleucid Empire, already fragmenting, loses Mesopotamia permanently. Mithridates takes the ancient title King of Kings, deliberately echoing the Achaemenids whose memory still carries weight across the plateau. The Parthian state that emerges is unlike anything the ancient world has seen, neither the rigid centralization of the Achaemenids nor the polis-based administration of the Seleucids. It operates through a feudal network of vassal kings and noble houses, the great families, Surin, Karen, Mihran, wielding enormous regional power while acknowledging Arsacid supremacy. The king rules from Ctesiphon on the Tigris, but his authority depends on the loyalty of these aristocratic clans, each commanding their own cavalry forces. And it is cavalry that defines Parthian military genius. The heavy cataphract, armored head to foot in overlapping iron scales, horse likewise sheathed in metal, charges with a long lance capable of piercing Roman shields. Behind them, the light horse archers, mounted on smaller, swifter horses, execute the maneuver that will enter military vocabulary forever. They feign retreat, drawing pursuers into disordered pursuit, then twist in the saddle and loose arrows backward with devastating accuracy. The Parthian shot. At Carrhae in 53 before the Common Era, this system annihilates a Roman army. Marcus Licinius Crassus, triumvir and richest man in Rome, leads 7 legions into the flat Mesopotamian plain near modern Haran. The Surin commander, whose personal name the sources record simply as Surina, deploys 10,000 horse archers supported by 1,000 cataphracts and a camel train carrying limitless arrow resupply. The Roman infantry, trained for close combat, cannot close the distance. Arrows fall in continuous sheets. 20,000 Romans die. 10,000 are captured. Crassus himself perishes in a failed parley. Rome's eastern boundary freezes at the Euphrates for generations. The Silk Road flows through Parthian territory, connecting Han China to the Mediterranean. Merv, Hecatompylos, and Ctesiphon grow wealthy as transit points for silk, spices, lapis lazuli, and glass. Parthian merchants control the middleman trade, preventing direct Roman-Chinese contact. The empire's coinage, silver drachms bearing the Arsacid profile and the seated archer on the reverse, circulates from the Indus to Armenia. Yet the Arsacids never fully centralize. Their tolerance allows Greek theatre to flourish in Seleucia alongside Zoroastrian worship in the highlands. Aramaic serves as administrative lingua franca, while Parthian, a northwestern Iranian language, carries court prestige. This pluralism is both strength and vulnerability. By the early 3rd century of the Common Era, after exhausting wars with Rome and internal feudal fragmentation, the last Arsacid king, Artabanus IV, faces a challenger from the south, a local king from Persis named Ardashir, who claims descent from a priest named Sasan and dreams of restoring the glory of the ancient kings. In 224 of the Common Era, the challenger from Persis meets Artabanus IV on the plain of Hormozdgan, and the Arsacid dynasty falls. Ardashir, son of Papak, grandson of Sasan, crowns himself Shahanshah, king of kings, and declares a restoration. The Sasanian Empire is born not merely as a political succession, but as a conscious revival, claiming spiritual descent from the Achaemenids who ruled 1,000 years before. Where the Parthians governed through feudal tolerance, Ardashir builds a centralized state with Zoroastrianism as its binding force, the sacred fires burning in every province as symbols of cosmic order. Ctesiphon on the Tigris becomes the imperial capital, its great audience hall, the Ta Khasra, rising as the largest single-span vault of unreinforced brickwork in the ancient world, its arch soaring 37 meters above the throne. The palace complex sprawls across both banks of the river, a deliberate statement of power facing westward toward Rome. From here, the early Sasanian kings administer an empire stretching from the Euphrates to the borders of Kushan territory in modern Afghanistan. The social order crystallizes into 4 estates: priests, warriors, scribes, and commoners. The chief priest, the Mobadan Mobad, holds authority second only to the king in spiritual matters. Fire temples rise across the landscape, at Adur Gushnasp in Azerbaijan for warriors, Adur Farnbag in Pars for priests, Adur Berzin Mir in Khorasan for farmers. The sacred flame, never permitted to touch the ground or be extinguished, represents Asha, truth, righteousness, cosmic order, the same principle that had animated Iranian religion since Zoroaster first preached on the eastern steppes. Shapur I, Ardashir's son, achieves what no eastern king had accomplished before. In 260 of the Common Era, at the Battle of Edessa, he captures the Roman Emperor Valerian alive. The rock reliefs at Nakshi Rostam and Bishapur immortalize this humiliation in stone: Shapur on horseback, Valerian kneeling in submission, Philip the Arab offering tribute. 3 Roman emperors carved into Iranian cliff face, subordinate to the King of Kings. These reliefs serve as imperial propaganda visible for centuries, carved beside the tombs of the ancient Achaemenid kings to emphasize dynastic continuity. The Sasanian court develops a sophistication that rivals and often surpasses Constantinople. Silver plates depict royal hunts, the king pursuing lions, boars, and rams, distributed as diplomatic gifts across Central Asia and as far as China. Silk textiles bearing Sasanian motifs of confronted animals and pearl roundels influence artistic traditions from Japan to Merovingian France. The crown of each king is unique, identifiable on coinage, growing ever more elaborate with celestial symbols: crescent moons, stars, wings representing Verithragna, the god of victory. At Gundashapur in Khuzestan, a remarkable academy emerges by the 5th century, gathering Greek, Syriac, and Indian medical and philosophical traditions under royal patronage. Nestorian Christian scholars fleeing Byzantine persecution find refuge here, translating Greek texts into Syriac. Indian mathematicians bring knowledge of numerals and astronomy. This institution becomes the ancient world's most advanced center of learning, a bridge between classical antiquity and what will later flower as Islamic science. Khosrow I, who reigns from 531 to 579, represents the Sasanian apex. His reforms reorganize taxation on fixed land assessments rather than fluctuating crop shares, create a professional military paid from the treasury rather than dependent on feudal levies, and divide the empire into 4 military districts. The Deccan class, lesser landed nobility, becomes the backbone of provincial administration. His justice becomes legendary, his name synonymous with wise kingship in Persian literature for 1,000 years afterward. The game of chess, arriving from India, finds its Persian form at his court. The word checkmate itself descends from Shah Mat, the king is dead. Yet beneath this magnificence, exhaustion accumulates. The wars with Byzantium drain both empires in endless cycles of siege and counter-siege across Mesopotamia, Armenia, and the Caucasus. Khosrow II briefly conquers Jerusalem in 614 and Egypt in 619, stretching Sasanian power to its greatest territorial extent. But the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius strikes back devastatingly, and by 628 the Sasanian state collapses into civil war. In 12 years, 10 kings and queens claim the throne. The empire that rivaled Rome for 4 centuries enters its final decade, hollowed from within, its treasury empty, its armies scattered, utterly unprepared for the storm gathering in the Arabian desert to the south. The storm arrives with a speed that stuns the ancient world. In 636 of the Common Era, at Qadisiyat on the edge of the Mesopotamian floodplain, a Sasanian army weakened by years of civil war meets an Arab force driven by faith and hunger for conquest. The battle lasts 3 days. Rostam Farrokhzad, the Persian commander, falls. The imperial banner, the Derafsh Kaviani, legendary standard of Iranian kingship since mythic times, is captured, its jewels stripped, its leather torn apart and divided among the victors. Within 6 years, the rest follows. Nahavand in 642 Det. The Arabs call it the victory of victories, breaks organized Persian resistance. Yazdegerd III, last of the Sasanian kings, flees eastward across his own empire like a hunted animal, finding no satrap willing to shelter a doomed monarch. In 651, he dies near Merv, murdered by a local miller for his remaining possessions. A dynasty that ruled for 427 years ends in a dusty provincial town. The conquest is swift, but conversion is not. For generations, the majority of the Iranian plateau remains Zoroastrian, paying the jizya tax that marks them as protected non-Muslims. The Arab governors rule from garrisoned cities, Kufa, Basra, while Persian administrative expertise proves indispensable. The Dekhans, the old landed gentry of the Sasanian countryside, retain their estates and their influence. Arabic becomes the language of religion, law, and high administration. But in villages, in markets, in the intimate spaces of family life, Iranian languages persist, evolving, adapting, absorbing Arabic vocabulary while retaining their grammatical bones. A century passes. Historians sometimes call it the 2 centuries of silence. Though silence is not quite accurate, it is rather a period when Persian literary production goes unrecorded because the prestige language of writing has shifted entirely to Arabic. Yet beneath this surface, something crucial ferments. Persian intellectuals master Arabic and contribute brilliantly to Islamic civilization while simultaneously nurturing memory of their own heritage. The Shu'ubiyya movement of the 8th and 9th centuries openly challenges Arab cultural supremacy, arguing that Persians possess a civilizational heritage equal or superior to that of the conquerors. The turning point comes with the Abbasid Revolution of 750. Abu Muslim, a Persian convert from Khorasan, raises the black banners that overthrow the Umayyad Caliphate. The new Abbasid dynasty moves the capital to Baghdad, built on the ruins of a Sasanian village, and relies heavily on Persian administrators. The Barmakid family, originally Buddhist priests from Balkh who converted to Islam, serves as viziers and shapes caliphal policy for decades. Persian methods of governance, Persian concepts of kingship, Persian court ceremony, all flow into the new Islamic imperial structure. The conquered have become indispensable to the conquerors. By the mid-9th century, as Abbasid central authority weakens, local Iranian dynasties begin to assert autonomy. The Tahirids in Khorasan, the Safarids who rise from coppersmith origins in Sistan, these are the first cracks through which a distinctly Persian political identity will re-emerge. The language survives its century of silence not through resistance alone, but through absorption and transformation. Taking Arabic script, taking thousands of Arabic words, yet restructuring them within Iranian syntax and sound. New Persian is being born, a language that will soon produce one of the world's great literary traditions. The fire temples may be fewer now, their flames tended by diminishing communities, but the civilization that built them has not vanished. It has changed its garments, learned new prayers, and begun to speak again. The language that refused to die now begins to sing. In the decades after 900 of the Common Era, the Samanid court at Bukhara becomes the crucible where new Persian crystallizes from a spoken vernacular into a vehicle of high literary expression. The Samanids, an Iranian dynasty governing Transoxiana and Khorasan as nominal vassals of the Abbasid Caliph, make a deliberate choice. They patronize poets and scholars who write in Persian rather than Arabic, elevating the tongue of the plateau to the status of courtly prestige. Rudaki, the blind poet of Samarkand, composes qasidas and ghazals that establish the formal meters and imagery of Persian verse. He dies around 941, but the tradition he inaugurates will outlive every dynasty that follows. It is under this Samanid patronage that a landowner's son from Tus in Khorasan begins the labor that will define Iranian identity for a millennium. Abu al-Qasim Ferdowsi starts composing the Shahnamehs around 977, drawing on older prose compilations of Iranian mythology and history. For more than 30 years he works, shaping 60,000 couplets into an epic that traces the story of Iran from creation through the Sasanian fall. The poem is completed around 1010 of the Common Era. Ferdowsi deliberately minimizes Arabic vocabulary, crafting a text of extraordinary linguistic purity that preserves pre-Islamic legends, Zoroastrian cosmology, and the memory of kings long dead. The Shahnameh becomes not merely literature, but a national scripture, the text through which Iranians remember who they were before the conquest. Meanwhile, in the same Samanid intellectual ecosystem, a prodigy from Afshana near Bukhara is reshaping human knowledge. Ibn Sina, known to the Latin West as Avicenna, is born around 980. By 18 he has mastered medicine, philosophy, and the natural sciences. His canon of medicine, completed around 1025, systematizes Greek, Indian, and Islamic medical knowledge into 5 volumes that will serve as the primary medical textbook in both the Islamic world and European universities for 6 centuries. His philosophical works synthesize Aristotelian logic with Neoplatonic metaphysics, creating a system that influences Thomas Aquinas and generations of Islamic thinkers. Ibn Sina writes in both Arabic and Persian, moving between courts as political instability forces him from one patron to the next, a pattern that defines intellectual life in this fragmented age. The Samanid state collapses by 999, overwhelmed by Turkic military pressure. The Ghaznavids, a dynasty of Turkic slave soldier origin based in eastern Afghanistan, seize Khorasan and extend their power into northern India. Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna, who reigns from 998 to 1030, is both destroyer and patron. He raids Indian temples for plunder while maintaining a court where scholars like al-Biruni produce masterworks of geography, mathematics, and comparative religion. Al-Biruni's study of India, completed around 1030, remains one of the most sophisticated works of cross-cultural observation produced in the medieval world. The Seljuk Turks sweep westward in the 1040s, defeating the Ghaznavids and capturing Baghdad itself by 1055. Yet these conquerors, like so many before them, adopt Persian administrative culture wholesale. Their great vizier Nizam al-Mulk, who serves from 1064 until his assassination in 1092, writes the Siyasatnama, a mirror for princes composed in elegant Persian prose. He establishes the Nizamiya madrasas across the empire, institutions of higher learning that systematize Islamic jurisprudence and theology. In Isfahan, which the Seljuks make their capital, the Friday Mosque receives its magnificent brick iwans and domed chambers. Omar Khayyam, working under Seljuk patronage, reforms the calendar in 1079, producing a solar calendar more accurate than the Gregorian system introduced 5 centuries later. His astronomical tables calculated at the Malik Shah Observatory in Isfahan represent the finest positional astronomy of the age. The same Khayyam composes quatrains, the Rubaiyat, whose philosophical skepticism and celebration of earthly pleasure will eventually enchant the Victorian world through Edward Fitzgerald's translation. Across these centuries of political fragmentation and Turkic military dominance, Persian culture does not merely survive, it conquers its conquerors, becoming the lingua franca of administration, poetry, and refined thought from Anatolia to Bengal. But the lingua franca of poets and administrators cannot shield cities from hooves. In 1219 of the Common Era, Genghis Khan sends envoys to the Khwarezmian Shah Muhammad proposing trade. The Shah executes them. It is perhaps the most consequential diplomatic blunder in human history. By 1220, Mongol armies pour through the northeastern passes in numbers that Central Asian cities have never witnessed. Estimates range from 100,000 to 200,000 mounted warriors, supported by siege engineers recruited from conquered Chinese territories. Bukhara falls first, in February of 1220. Genghis reportedly enters the city's great mosque, asks if it is the Sultan's palace, and upon learning it is the house of God, declares that his horses need fodder. The city burns. Samarkand surrenders within days, its garrison slaughtered despite promises of mercy. Then Merv, once among the largest cities on earth, a center of scholarship housing libraries and observatories. In 1221, Tolui, the Khan's youngest son, accepts the city's surrender and proceeds to systematically execute its population. Persian chroniclers record figures that strain belief. 700,000 dead, perhaps more. Even halving such numbers leaves a catastrophe without parallel in the region's history. Nishapur falls in 1221 as well, razed so thoroughly that the site is ploughed and planted with barley. The skull pyramids that Mongol armies leave behind serve as deliberate monuments of terror. The Qanat systems that sustained agriculture for millennia are destroyed. Underground channels that took generations to construct collapse in hours when their surface openings are deliberately blocked. Some regions of Khorasan will not recover their pre-Mongol population levels for 6 centuries, yet survival takes unexpected forms. The Mongol Ilkhanate, established by Hulagu after 1258, gradually absorbs the administrative traditions of the lands it rules. Persian bureaucrats become indispensable. Rashid al-Din, a Jewish convert serving as vizier to Ghazan Khan, compiles the Jami al-Tawarikh, a universal history of unprecedented scope, illustrated with miniatures that blend Persian, Chinese, and European artistic traditions. Ghazan's conversion to Islam in 1295 signals the Ilkhanate's cultural surrender to the civilization it conquered. The magnificent tomb of Ol-Jaitu at Sultaniya, completed around 1312, rises with a dome spanning 25 meters, the largest brick dome ever built at that time, sheathed in turquoise tile that catches the plateau sun. In Shiraz, sheltered by geography from the worst destruction, Hafez composes ghazals during the 14th century that encode mystical longing within the imagery of wine, roses, and the beloved. His tomb garden becomes a pilgrimage site. The Muzaffarid and Jalarid successor states that fragment the Ilkhanate provide unstable but sufficient patronage for poets and calligraphers working among ruins. Then Timur. Between 1380 and 1405, this Turkic-Mongol conqueror from Transoxiana sweeps across Iran repeatedly, adding new layers of destruction to landscapes still scarred from the first Mongol wave. Isfahan revolts against his tax collectors in 1387. Timur orders each soldier to bring back a head. 70,000 skulls are stacked into towers along the city walls. Yet Timur's descendants, the Timurids, become history's most paradoxical dynasty, transforming conquest wealth into artistic patronage of extraordinary refinement. Herat under Sultan Hussein Baikara in the late 15th century nurtures the painter Behzad, whose miniatures achieve a psychological depth and compositional mastery that influences Persian painting for centuries. Samarkand's Registan Square, framed by 3 madrasas faced in geometric tilework of cobalt and gold, stands as testament to what Timurid wealth could build. The Persian language emerges from 2 centuries of devastation not diminished, but enriched, its poetry deeper, its artistic traditions fused with Chinese and Central Asian elements that the Mongol world system carried across continents. And then the Safavid sun sets in blood. In 1722, Afghan Ghilzai tribesmen under Mahmud Hotaki breach the walls of Isfahan after a siege of 6 months. The city that Shah Abbas built into one of the world's great capitals, its population once 600,000 is reduced to famine and slaughter. Sultan Hussein, the last effective Safavid Shah, surrenders his crown personally to the Afghan commander. The turquoise domes still stand, but the empire that gave them meaning has collapsed from within, hollowed by decades of weak kings, court intrigue, and the alienation of the very Kizilbash tribal warriors who once formed the dynasty's military backbone. From this chaos rises one of history's most extraordinary military figures. Nader, a Turkmen chieftain from Khorasan, begins as a warlord serving a Safavid pretender, then systematically reconquers the Iranian heartland. By 1736, he dispenses with the fiction of Safavid restoration entirely, crowning himself Shah on the Mughal plain near Persepolis. Nader Shah's ambition knows no geographic limit. He drives the Afghans from Isfahan, pushes the Ottomans back beyond their pre-war frontiers, recaptures Kandahar, and then turns his gaze eastward toward the staggering wealth of Mughal India. In 1739, his army crosses the Khyber Pass and shatters the Mughal forces at Karnal. Delhi opens its gates. The plunder Nader carries home includes the Peacock Throne itself, the Koh-i-Noor diamond, and treasures so vast they allow him to suspend taxation across Iran for 3 years. Yet Nader's empire is built on perpetual war, and when the wars cease to pay, the system devours itself. His later reign descends into paranoia and cruelty. He blinds his own son, massacres entire cities suspected of disloyalty. His assassination in 1747 by his own officers dissolves the empire overnight into competing fragments. The Zand dynasty under Karim Khan offers Iran a brief respite of humane governance. Ruling from Shiraz rather than Isfahan or the emerging northern city of Tehran, Karim Khan refuses the title of Shah, calling himself merely Vakil, regent of the people. His citadel, the Arg of Karim Khan, rises in Shiraz with its distinctive leaning tower, a fortress that doubles as administrative center. Under his rule, from 1751 to 1779, trade revives, the arts flourish modestly, and southern Iran experiences a stability it has not known in decades. But the Zand realm remains geographically limited, and upon Karim Khan's death, succession wars consume the dynasty within a decade. The Qajar tribe, Turkmen in origin and based in the north, seizes power through the brutal determination of Aga Muhammad Khan, who captures and blinds the last Zand ruler in 1794 and establishes Tehran as his capital, a strategic choice, positioned near the Qajar tribal heartlands and the Caspian coast. His coronation in 1796 inaugurates a dynasty that will rule Iran for over a century, though it will preside not over expansion, but over painful contraction. The Qajar era opens onto a world transformed by European industrial and military power. Russia presses southward through the Caucasus, and two devastating wars, 1804 to 1813 and 1826 to 1828, strip Iran of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan through the treaties of Gulistan and Turkmenchay. The latter treaty, signed in 1828, becomes a wound in Iranian national memory that never fully heals. It grants Russia extraterritorial rights, imposes crushing indemnities, and establishes the Aras River as a border that divides Iranian-speaking peoples permanently. Britain presses from the east, blocking Qajar attempts to reassert control over Herat and Afghanistan. Iran finds itself caught between two imperial systems, with neither the military technology nor the institutional capacity to resist either. Tehran grows from a modest walled town into a capital of contradictions. Golestan palaces mirror halls reflecting European chandeliers alongside Persian miniature traditions, telegraph lines crossing deserts where camel caravans still carry goods as they have for millennia. The question that will define the next century crystallizes in these decades. How does a civilization of such depth survive in a world where power now flows from factories, railways, and rifled artillery rather than from poetry, faith, and ancient administrative wisdom? The answer to that question arrives not from the court, but from the streets. In December of 1905, Tehran's bazaar merchants close their shops in protest after the governor beats sugar traders for refusing to lower prices. Merchants, clerics, and reformist intellectuals take sanctuary, first in mosques, then in the grounds of the British legation, where thousands camp for weeks demanding a constitution. Muzaffar al-Din Shah, aging and ill, yields. On August 5, 1906, he signs a decree establishing a national consultative assembly, the Majlis. Iran becomes the first nation in the Middle East to adopt a constitution limiting monarchical power. The document draws from Belgian and French models, yet roots itself in Islamic jurisprudence. It guarantees rights of assembly, establishes separation of powers, and creates an elected legislature. But the triumph proves fragile. Muhammad Ali Shah, ascending the throne in 1907, despises the constitutional constraints. In June of 1908, he orders his Russian-officered Cossack brigade to bombard the Majlis building. Civil war erupts. Constitutionalist forces from Tabriz and the Bakhtiari tribal lands march on Tehran, deposing the Shah in 1909. Yet the restored constitution cannot overcome the deeper structural weakness. Iran remains divided between Russian and British spheres of influence, formalized in the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907 that partitioned the country without Iranian consent. The Great War brings occupation despite Iran's declared neutrality. Ottoman, Russian, and British forces trample across Iranian territory. Famine kills an estimated 2 million Iranians between 1917 and 1919. From this chaos emerges Reza Khan, commander of the Cossack Brigade, who stages a coup in February 1921, becomes war minister, then prime minister, and finally, deposing the last Qajar in 1925, crowns himself Reza Shah Pahlavi. His model is Ataturk's Turkey. He builds the Trans-Iranian Railway through impossible Zagros gorges, establishes Tehran University in 1934, bans the veil, mandates Western dress, and creates a conscript army. The state centralizes with brutal efficiency, crushing tribal autonomy, suppressing the clergy's judicial power, and forcing nomadic peoples into settlement. But Reza Shah's flirtation with Nazi Germany proves fatal. In August 1941, British and Soviet forces invade simultaneously. Within weeks, the Shah abdicates in favor of his 21-year-old son, Mohammad Reza. The young Shah inherits a throne hollowed by foreign occupation and a population that remembers constitutional promises unfulfilled. The oil question dominates the post-war decade. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, successor to the Anglo-Persian Oil Company founded in 1908 at Masjed Soleiman, extracts vast wealth while Iran receives a pittance. In 1951, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalizes the oil industry. Britain imposes a devastating embargo. In August 1953, a joint British-American covert operation, Operation Ajax, overthrows Mossadegh and restores the Shah's absolute authority. Mohammad Reza Shah now rules without meaningful opposition. He launches the White Revolution in 1963. Land reform, women's suffrage, literacy corps, modernizing from above while building the Savak secret police apparatus below. Oil revenues quadruple after 1973. Tehran sprouts modernist towers, highways, and the soaring Shahyard monument. Yet the bazaar merchants feel squeezed, the clergy feel marginalized, intellectuals feel silenced, and the urban poor feel forgotten amid visible corruption. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, exiled since 1964 for opposing the Shah's reforms, broadcasts revolutionary sermons from Najaf and then Paris. On September 8, 1978, Black Friday, soldiers fire on demonstrators at Jaleh Square, killing dozens. The revolution becomes unstoppable. Strikes paralyze the oil industry. On January 16, 1979, the Shah departs Iran forever. On February 1st, Khomeini descends from an Air France jet into Tehran, greeted by millions. 25 centuries of monarchy end in weeks. The ancient plateau enters its most radical transformation since the Arab conquest 13 centuries before. Within weeks of Khomeini's return, the machinery of a new state takes shape with astonishing speed. A referendum in March of 1979 delivers an overwhelming vote for an Islamic republic. By December, a new constitution enshrines the principle of velayat-e-faqih, guardianship of the jurist, placing supreme political authority in the hands of a senior cleric. Khomeini assumes this position, standing above president, parliament, and judiciary alike. Revolutionary committees patrol neighborhoods. Revolutionary courts deliver swift justice against officials of the old regime. The fabric of Iranian governance transforms utterly, yet the bureaucratic skeleton beneath. Ministries, provincial administration, the patterns first laid down by Sasanian and Safavid predecessors, endures beneath new revolutionary language. In November of 1979, students seize the American embassy in Tehran, holding 52 diplomats hostage for 444 days. The crisis severs Iran's relationship with the West and consolidates revolutionary power at home. Before the hostages return, a far greater catastrophe descends. In September of 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces invade across the Shatt al-Arab waterway, beginning 8 years of grinding warfare that will claim between 500,000 and 1 million lives on both sides. The war's trenches stretch across Khuzestan's flatlands, recalling the Western Front in their futility. Iranian teenage volunteers and the Basijeh walk into minefields. Cities endure missile bombardment. Chemical weapons fall on Iranian soldiers at the front and on Kurdish civilians at Halabja. When the ceasefire arrives in August of 1988, Khomeini accepts it as drinking poison. No territory changes hands. The revolution has survived, but at staggering human cost. Khomeini dies in June of 1989. The Assembly of Experts selects Ali Khamenei as his successor. The presidency of Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani pursues economic reconstruction. In 1997, Mohammad Khatami wins the presidency in a landslide, his reform platform promising civil society, rule of law, and dialogue among civilizations. Yet the structural constraints of the system, the Guardian Council's veto power, the supreme leader's authority over military and judiciary, limit what elected officials can achieve. The contested presidential election of 2009 sparks the Green Movement as millions march through Tehran's streets demanding accountability. The state suppresses the protests through force and mass arrests. International pressure mounts over Iran's nuclear enrichment program. Sanctions strangle the economy, collapsing the rial's value and cutting oil exports. In 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action offers relief. Iran limits enrichment in exchange for sanctions removal. 3 years later, the United States withdraws from the agreement, reimposing maximum pressure. The economy contracts again. In September of 2022, the death of Mahsa Amini in morality police custody ignites the woman life freedom protests across dozens of cities, the most sustained challenge to the Islamic Republic's social order in its history. Tehran sprawls today beneath the snow-capped Alborz Range, home to nearly 9 million people in a nation of 88 million. Revolutionary murals fade on concrete walls beside satellite dishes and coffee shops. The bazaar at Isfahan still hums beneath Safavid vaulting. At Persepolis, limestone columns cast the same shadows they cast 2,500 years ago. Iran remains what it has always been, a civilization shaped by its plateau, transformed by successive faiths and rulers, yet carrying forward a continuity of language, poetry, art, and identity that few nations on earth can match. The weight of 25 centuries presses upon every political decision, every cultural gesture, every young Iranian who reads Hafez on a smartphone screen beneath the same stars that watched Cyrus ride south from Anshan. Thank you for joining this journey through one of humanity's oldest continuous civilizations. If this story moved you, consider subscribing so you never miss the next exploration into the deep currents of history.